Welcome to the SDA Housing Podcast, brought to you by NDIS Property Australia. Before starting this episode, we need to provide a general disclaimer. Information contained in this podcast is general in nature only. It does not take into account the objectives, financial situation, or needs of any particular person. You need to consider your financial situation and needs before making any decisions based on the information in this podcast. And you should consider seeking independent and professional advice for your personal circumstances. All right, let's begin.
Hello, everybody. My name is Minh. I'm your host, and you're listening to the SDA Housing Podcast. The show explains, highlights, guides, and brings awareness about all things SDA in this ever-changing India's world. Today, we have a repeat guest speaker, Mr. Kevin Chen from Paramount Disability Homes. Kevin, how are you?
Good, mate. How are you? Thanks for having me again.
Awesome, mate. Been looking forward to a follow-up interview with you on the podcast. Today's topic is s100, s48, change of circumstances. We'd like to hear more about your opinion about the whole process in procuring participants that should be qualified, should be eligible for SDA housing, but may not be funded. What's your normal process in marketing and then receiving applications and then engaging with provider or SDA support coordinators and getting the whole change of circumstances process beginning. So let's start from scratch, Kevin. How did you guys in Paramount Disability Homes work in the marketplace in Melbourne in terms of marketing, advertising, promoting, procuring, and working with the stakeholders and participants to get funding and products to market?
Yeah, I think really good question, and you've covered quite a lot there, but I think we'll start off on how we've sort of procured in the past couple of months. It's certainly been different to how we did it last year. Obviously, there's been a lot of stock that's come up recently in, Victoria. So, when you have an oversupply in these greenfield areas, we are thinking of different strategies to, again, help investors get some sort of rental return whilst balancing, a fair outcome for the SIL providers and the participants as well. So, especially in these greenfield areas, because there is quite an oversupply, not every investor will get an SDA client. You guys probably know as well, especially in Melbourne West, there are an abundance of empty properties sitting out there. So when we work with SIL providers and we get referrals, the participant may just have SIL funding. So that's the first sort of scenario. If they have SIL funding, we would have to see if they're eligible to apply for that SDA funding. If they are, what we usually can do is offer them what's known as a SIL, or we can rent out the property to the SIL provider. So the SIL provider will take on a lease agreement with us, and they'll be paying sort of your market rent or a little bit above market rent, so a bit of a premium, given that the SIL participant is going through, again, an s48 to get SDA funding in their plan. That's the first scenario. The second scenario is we can rent out the whole property to a SIL provider on the basis that no participants will ever get SDA funding. So they'll use it just as a SIL house. And that is pretty much still the same. Some SIL providers are paying up to $70,000 for a high physical support house. They obviously want like a larger home, so usually a 3+ OA house. And then the final one is an SDA and SIL arrangement. So for example, a SIL provider can bring us an SDA client. We can actually allow for a SIL client to live under the roof. Obviously, they have to make some sort of rental contribution as well. So that's the three sort of arrangements we are doing now, how we're procuring, how we're sort of balancing a rental income for the investors that have invested in an oversaturated area.
Got you. Thank you for that summary, Kevin. Can you please explain to our listeners the kind of time frame that is recommended for marketing and procurement process, as in, do you start a year before completion of the build, or 6 months before, or 3 months, or 3 months after? What is the best practice for investors to engage in terms of time frame to a SDA provider like yourself? When should they engage you guys?
Yeah, really good question. I think, look, if I answered this question last year, we would say 3 to 6 months before completion, because we could build a genuine wait list of participants if there wasn't an oversupply in the area. But now, because, for example, if you are looking for a house in Clyde, if you go on Housing Hub, you'll be able to find, a lot of properties that are readily available. Doing the marketing beforehand is not necessary, I would say. So at least 1 month before completion is a good time to start marketing for the property. If it's 3 months before, no one will wait for your property unless it's in a very good location. So around a month before completion, that gives us enough time to start the marketing campaign and then let, seal providers know, let support coordinators know that the property is upcoming, because generally these transitions for participants can take up to a month, anywhere from 2 weeks to 4 weeks. So that's when we would recommend, that marketing campaign to start.
Cool. But I want to throw a curveball again, Kevin, and I'm sure your answer will change with this curveball. You were saying a month. That assumes everything is on track, meaning construction completion, SDA assessor providers there, SDA assessment will go through fine, and participants are fully funded and ready to move. That's in a perfect world. As you know, in a perfect world, well, in a normal world, there is no perfect process. There's always delays, defects, settlement dates. There's also SDA certification, lodgement to the NDIS for enrollment. There's also, marketing to find fully funded participants. And as you know, not everyone that comes along to the table is fully funded. Now, back to the topic at here on this top podcast, s48, s100. What is the time frame you think is reasonable if a person is not funded and should be, for them to go back to the NDIA to get a change of circumstances? So it's not a month, because obviously investors want their tenant in quickly as possible. So what is ideally, given these delays and these potential challenges, what is the ideal time frame to identify earmark participants to get their change of circumstances in order to move into this house when it's ready? 4 months prior, 5 months prior, 8 months prior? What's the answer?
Yeah, I think if we're considering that the participant is going for a change of circumstances, I would probably give it at least 3 to 6 months. And I think I'll quickly go over how the change of circumstances works. So sort of the first stage is what's known as a s48. So, the participant may not have SDA funding in their plan, or they may already have it, but they want to change, for example, the category of the plan. What they will do is, an s48 is a review of the plan to get an adjustment or something added into the plan. That usually takes 4 to 5 weeks, I would say, or up to 2 months for the first outcome to come back. And then the NDIS may, say, okay, this is great. We'll approve for SDA funding in your plan. Or they may come back and they may say, look, we don't think it's suitable for you to have SDA funding in your plan. And that's when, the support coordinator with the participant may apply for what's known as the s100. So an s100 is to appeal that decision. So if the decision has not gone into their favor, they can go and appeal that decision. Obviously, they need to sit down with the occupational therapist, gather more evidence on why they need, for example, SDA, and then they need to resubmit what's known as the s100. And this process can take up to half a year. So that's when people would say, change of circumstances take a very long time. This is what they're usually talking about, because a lot of times the NDIS won't approve the first s48 change. After 6 to 8 months, if the decision is still no good, sort of the last sort of resort would be to go to the tribunal, to lodge a formal complaint to get that adjusted in the plan. So that, if we're considering that whole time frame, it could be up to a whole year. But usually after the s100, with the right sort of support coordinator, with the right occupational therapist, evidence, as long as you can sort of justify why you need that SDA incorporated in your plan, it is quite successful. So 6 to 8 months would be my answer.
Got you. Much appreciated. So in your line of work as an SDA provider, it would be fair to be conservative in an investor's expectations that they should be out there talking to providers, and obviously providers talking to their network of SILs and participants on finding out interests from the community as to who wants to live in this type of dwelling in this kind of location, and if they have funding, and if not, how far are they into their change of circumstances process. So 1 month is probably too late, I would assume, given the fact that not everyone has funding out there. I would assume 4 to 6 months prior to completion is a good date for an investor to engage a provider, estate provider, start talking about options.
Yes, I think definitely necessary for investors to engage with a SDA provider, 6 months at least before completion, so they have an understanding of what are the interest levels in their given area. But when it comes to marketing, online marketing, it won't have to be done that early on. But I definitely think there's obviously, as we're an SDA provider, we have a lot of different ways that we procure. So it's not just online marketing. If a build is sort of 6 months away from completion and we can match that up with a participant that's happened to go through a change of circumstance or the S100, if timeframes align, a lot of the times they are very happy to reserve and wait for that property to be developed.
Gotcha. I want to take you through a case example. Me and Debbie had a meeting this morning with a guy called Chris. He's in Brisbane. He has 2 houses side by side under construction, the slab just poured, and there's a granny flat at the back. So it's HPS house and HPS granny flat. Side by side, completion in July, August this year. So we're 6 months away. In this theoretical scenario, being 2 side by sides, so 2 tenants in each house plus granny flat, that's 6 tenants, participants for him required. I assume, given the numbers here of 6 participants, he should be looking at engaging someone or marketing 5-6 months prior to completion, given the numbers here, right?
100%. So look, we have a very similar sort of project in Broadmeadows here in Victoria. And what we've done as an SDA provider is we've reached out to our SIL network. A lot of the times, SIL providers will already be operating, in SIL homes. And they will have, for example, maybe 4 participants under one SIL house. And a few of them may already be approved for SDA funding. Now, what we can do is, present these opportunities to them at 6 months before completion. And that way, the SIL provider, we can do what's known as a joint marketing venture. We will try and find SDA participants from, let's just say, hospitals, from aged cares, from referrals from the NDI support coordinators, ones that aren't attached with SIL providers, and the SIL provider will usually have their own network of participants as well that they are ready to move in to, the home that's being constructed. So 6 months gives a very good time frame also to allow for the change of circumstances for any of their clients that have the SIL funding that may be eligible for SDA funding, so they can go through that process. So when the build finishes, they've got the matching done with the participants and they're ready to move in. That's a very ideal situation, but it needs to be done at least 6 months before completion.
Gotcha. Kevin, in your experience, do you find that some SIL providers who work with you might say, here's our first anchor tenant, SDA, in this house. We think we have another 1 or 2 more participants who should get SDA funding. Can we put them in the house with this guy, first anchor tenant, and go through the whole process of the change of circumstances? Do investors allow that second or third tenant to move in who is not SDA funded yet to be in the same house for the SIL provider?
Yes, so definitely we are taking on that sort of arrangement. And I think more and more people are open to that sort of arrangement because, as long as the first participant does have SDA funding, it does cover a portion of, I guess, the mortgage for the mum and dad investor. What we can do is with the second participant, we would have I guess the SIL provider and us and all the other key stakeholders would have a pretty good understanding of whether the likelihood of that participant getting SDA funding. And if they are going through that application, they are, in most cases open to move into these SDA homes. Investors should be open to that arrangement as well. How the financials work behind this is we would still charge the maximum reasonable rental contribution, which is around 12 grand. And then sometimes the SIL provider will, put in another 12 grand. So that would be around another 24 grand in income per annum for the investor.
Oh, that's good. So in theory, you might get 45 to 55K for anchor tenant, and then another 12 and 12 if it's number 2, number 3, or 12 plus the SIL provider putting in a top up. So that's possibly 70, 80 total, and that's a temporary outcome for now. while they're waiting.
And it worked out really well because if the participant does get approved for SDA funding, it could double the existing anchor funding, so it could go up to 100,000. But even if they don't get the SDA funding approved, it's still an extra 20 grand for the foreseeable future, which is quite a good arrangement for the investor.
Gotcha. Have you come across any SDA projects where there's a granny flat in the back with the main SDA dwelling
We have.
on site?
What we've seen is designs of high physical support at the front and then a robust granny flat at the back. Obviously, it does. It just depends. Not all SIL providers will be able to take, for example, all 6 rooms in the project that you described. But the granny flat, does it have an OOA room? Separate OOA room? No. So it would be under the assumption that one of the duplexes would have an OOA room dedicated for that granny flat.
Yeah. I reckon, if this house is 3 tenant in the front and a granny flat at the back, the granny flat is going to be more FA or an IL guy that's more independent at the back there, who can call upon the OOA on site in the main dwelling and or next door, because really I find that providers love the side-by-side houses. They have efficiency of their model to have 2 staff on site to cover both houses.
Yeah, definitely. I think a granny flat could be a great option. I mean, SIL providers love more sort of accommodations in one sort of area. So the feedback we've got from a lot of SIL providers as well is that they love 3-bedroom plus OA designs because of the 1-to-3 care ratio. I think they're maximizing sort of their worker to. So if they can get,
I agree.
If they can get 3 1-to-3 desks, it works out really, really well for the SIL providers. But if you have a 2+ OA house and then a granny flat in the back, that also works out really well because a lot of participants, they do want to live by themselves. They don't like that shared area. So that could be a great idea for teaming up like independents.
Yeah. This case scenario I'm talking about here is 3-bed plus OOA plus a granny flat.
Okay, well that
times 2. So the max here is 3, 1 is 4, times 2 is 8 participants on site for these 2 blocks. But I told the investor, I said, look, assume you got 2 tenants plus OOA and a spare room, and the granny flat at the back has 1 tenant. And then you got side by side, so there's probably 5 or 6 all up tenants.
Yep.
Not the 8.
And look, if one SIL provider can take on all of those, rooms, then it would be amazing. But in our case, we would probably tender it to 2 different SIL providers. They have a lot to play around with there.
Yep, gotcha. Kevin, are there anything else to add from your end in terms of the whole S100, S48 and procurement process that you want to add before?
Yeah, I think it's
this episode,
especially we can talk about apartments and sort of the how we are procuring for apartments. Yeah.
Can I jump in? You and I had a discussion about 2 months ago about the minimum 7 apartments to be efficient, to break even.
We can talk about it, but look, in terms of sort of the concierge model, our view has sort of shifted, and it works on the basis that there is a change of circumstances, because in most of the participants that will get procured, I would say 80% of them will have to go through that process. So we can talk about it very briefly.
Yeah, sure. Let's talk about it just for a few minutes. Explain what a concierge model is. Secondly, out there in the marketplace is 10 and 1. We're seeing 15s and 2s. Does a 4-pack of apartments work or not? Because it is under the 7 minimum. Just
sure. So
your feedback on this.
The concierge model is essentially there's a SIL provider that will act usually as an overnight carer, or what they'll do is all the unplanned supports. So if a participant needs them to help them get a coffee, for example, they can call the unplanned support or the concierge SIL provider on site. Now, the participant can still bring their own SIL provider to do the planned supports, but they will always have that backup on site. Now, a lot of these apartments, what will happen is participants come through, there will already be a concierge model in place, so a SIL provider doing the unplanned supports, and then they might bring their own provider for the 4 hours of, for example, planned supports. Now, previously in our previous discussion, for this SIL provider that's doing the concierge, they usually need at least 6 participants to make it feasible, because they do need to have 1 staff on site. If it's for 24/7, they need to make sure that they they're not at a loss, essentially, to be providing that care. What we found is that with apartments, it's not always feasible to get your 6 participants, in there before sort of completion. So it's very, very challenging for the SEAL provider who's doing this concierge to make it financially viable. The first thing is that there's not many participants at all with the apartment funding. So apartment funding is usually above 100 grand per year. It's very, very rare. So in order for it...
Kevin, I do want to add, as long as investors are aware that out of 10 potential apartments, you won't get 1 or 2 at the highest HPS apartment funding, 1 or 2 or 3 at the FA, 80 to 90 kind of number, and then a couple of ILs and house funding guys come in. So it is a pick of the draw, and those who are investors who are asking for highest income possible, they've got to realize that 100, 110 may not be possible. Be realistic and assume a 60 to 80.
Yeah, definitely. So when we bring in the participants, they may not have that 100 grand funding. They may be at 80 grand, maybe a bit less. That doesn't stop them from, living in the apartment. So we usually still let them come in. And what we'll do is as soon as they come in, they will have to go through a change of circumstances to get that funding boosted to apartment. Now, why it works out quite well is because, if we want to justify to the NDIs that if we're going to increase their SDA funding, there'll be a decrease in what's needed in their SEAL funding. And especially because now you've got an unplanned, provider doing the concierge, and you can reduce your hours of plan supports. You actually can reduce the funding you need in the SEAL plan. So the NDIS does like that. And if they can see that you can save on your SEAL component, and they will boost the SDA component, which will be a win-win situation. It would be more income for the investors at the end of the day. But that process, again, can take up to 6 months. So we would let them in first, and then we'll go through that process at the second step.
Gotcha. Thank you so much for that. Well, I think it's good for now. Thank you so much, Kevin, for your contribution to today's S100, S48 discussion. We look forward to talking in more detail about how things are going in your business, your launch of Vital House branding in Melbourne in this new year, and seeing how things are overall in Melbourne with regards to Vic Homes and other opportunities. Yes, 12 months.
I think it's still a growing space. We do have a lot of changes happening at the end of the year, so we are just preparing ourselves the best we can. But thanks for having me. Happy to speak to you guys again in the near future.
Thank you so much, Kevin. Have a good day. Bye-bye. Thank you so much for that, Kevin. All the best. Bye-bye.
We hope you enjoyed this episode. Please make sure you are subscribed and following us so you can keep in the loop with all of our upcoming episodes. We would really appreciate it if you could leave us a 5-star rating, a written review, and to share this podcast with those that could benefit. Until next time, catch you on the next episode.